"You don't belong here, Marcus." Daniel Harker spat, his fist crashing into the black father's jaw with a crack that silenced the street. Neighbors froze, phones raised as Marcus steadied himself. But before Daniel could strike again, a shadow loomed behind him, one that made the color drain from his face. The late afternoon sun baked the quiet suburban street, its heat clinging to the air like a simmering grudge. Kids' bicycles lay abandoned on the sidewalks, the faint hum of lawnmowers mixing with the distant barking of a dog. It should have been just another calm day on Willow Creek Lane, but calm was the last thing brewing between House 14 and House 16. Daniel Harker stood on his front lawn, his pale skin flushed red, not from the sun, but from the fury twisting his face. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, and his voice cut through the peaceful hum of the neighborhood like broken glass. "I've told you before, Marcus," Daniel spat, stepping forward. "You keep your trash off my yard, you hear me?" Marcus Coleman, a broad-shouldered black man in his late 30s, was standing by the edge of his driveway, one hand resting on the handle of a push mower. His dark skin gleamed with sweat under the sun, and his jaw tightened as he kept his voice steady. "My son's basketball rolled into your yard, Daniel. That's all. I told him to grab it and come right back. No reason to make this into something it's not." But Daniel's pale blue eyes hardened. "Don't tell me what's a reason and what's not," he snapped. "You people are always pushing boundaries." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment even the wind seemed to stop. Marcus's 10-year-old son, Jaden, froze where he stood by the front porch, clutching the orange basketball to his chest. His wide brown eyes darted between the two men. "Watch yourself," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. "Oh, I'm watching," Daniel shot back, stepping closer until they were only a few feet apart. "You think you belong here? In this neighborhood? You think just because you can afford a house, you can bring your whole attitude here?" Marcus didn't flinch, though his grip on the mower tightened. "I mow my lawn, I pay my bills, I mind my business. The problem isn't me, Daniel." The tension had begun to draw eyes. A couple of neighbors across the street, Mrs. Patterson and her teenage grandson, had stepped onto their porch. Another man paused in his driveway with a set of car keys dangling from his hand, his gaze fixed on the scene. Daniel's lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. Always playing the victim. Always. He didn't finish the sentence. In one sudden, violent motion, Daniel lunged forward, shoving Marcus hard in the chest. The mower rocked backward, its handle slamming against Marcus's ribs. Marcus stumbled, his back heel catching on the edge of the driveway, and pain flashed across his face. Jaden cried out, dropping the ball and taking a step forward, but Marcus lifted one hand in a silent signal to stay back. "You put your hands on me again, and—" Marcus started, but Daniel cut him off, his voice rising. "And what, you gonna hit me? You think you can scare me?" His fist came up fast, connecting with Marcus's cheekbone in a sickening thud. The sound seemed to echo off the houses, and a gasp went up from somewhere across the street. Marcus's head snapped to the side, the force staggering him. Jaden screamed, "Dad!" and tried to run forward, but Mrs. Patterson's grandson stepped down from the porch and gently caught him by the shoulders. Marcus's knees bent slightly, his body absorbing the blow, but his eyes locked back on Daniel. He straightened, his chest heaving, but his voice was steady. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Daniel's grin widened, ugly and smug. "Oh yeah? And who's going to do something about it? You?" The sound of a phone unlocking cut through the heat. The man in the other driveway had his camera raised now, recording. Others began pulling out their phones, too. The air shifted. The street wasn't just quiet anymore. It was holding its breath. Marcus didn't answer. He took one step forward, close enough that their shadows merged on the cracked pavement between the driveways. His voice was low, almost calm. "You don't know who you're messing with." Daniel barked out a laugh and shoved him again, harder this time. Marcus's back hit the hood of his own car, the metallic thud making Jaden flinch. "You think I care?" Daniel growled, raising his fist again. This time Marcus caught the punch mid-swing, his palm closing like steel around Daniel's wrist. Daniel's eyes widened for just a fraction of a second before Marcus shoved him back a step. "That's enough," Marcus said, the words more command than request. But Daniel wasn't finished. His pride, fueled by rage in something deeper, uglier, wouldn't let him back down in front of an audience. He rushed forward, swinging again, his knuckles grazing Marcus's jaw. The crowd on the sidewalks grew thicker. A young woman on a bike stopped at the curb, pulling out her phone. Two kids leaned out from behind a hedge, watching wide-eyed. Marcus blocked the next hit, his muscles tense, every part of him aware that his son was watching. He didn't want Jaden to see him lose control. Daniel spat at the ground between them. "You don't belong here. You never will." The words sliced deeper than the punches, carrying the weight of every look, every whispered comment Marcus had endured since moving in. But before he could respond, Daniel slammed a fist into his ribs, the air rushing out of Marcus's lungs. He staggered back, hand instinctively clutching his side, and Daniel moved in again, his face twisted with rage. The crowd murmured, restless. One voice called out, "Hey, man, stop." But Daniel didn't even glance up. Jaden's small voice broke through the noise. "Dad, please." Marcus's eyes flicked to his son, just for a moment, and Daniel took the opening, delivering a brutal shove that sent Marcus sprawling to one knee on the pavement. The air went still again. Daniel loomed over him, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his temple. "Get up," he snarled. "I'm not done with you." Marcus rose slowly, each movement deliberate. He straightened to his full height, towering over Daniel by an inch, and looked him dead in the eye. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "You will be." A shadow fell across the lawn. Heavy footsteps crunched on the grass behind Daniel, slow and measured, like someone who wasn't in a rush because they already knew how this would end. The shift in the crowd was immediate. Phones rose higher. Whispers spread. Eyes darted not to Marcus, but to the figure approaching from behind Daniel. Daniel didn't notice. Not yet. Marcus's gaze moved past Daniel's shoulder for the first time, and a faint, knowing smile touched the corner of his mouth. Jaden's eyes went wide, his lips parting in surprise. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away, and Daniel finally heard the voice. "You've got about 2 seconds to step back from him," it said, low, even, but carrying the kind of authority that froze every muscle in the human body. Daniel's jaw worked as he turned his head, the beginnings of a scoff on his lips, and then he saw exactly who was standing behind him. Daniel froze mid-turn, his eyes locking on the figure behind him. The man was tall, easily 6'3", with a frame built from years of disciplined training. His skin was the deep, rich brown of someone who had spent time under unforgiving suns in places far from this quiet street. A black tactical vest hugged his torso, a gold badge glinting faintly against the dark fabric. His left hand rested on his hip, close to the holstered weapon at his side, but it was his eyes, sharp, cold, and utterly unblinking, that made the street fall into silence. It took Daniel only a second to recognize him, but that second stretched into eternity. "Captain Elijah Cole," the man said evenly, as if Daniel needed the introduction. His voice was steady, quiet enough that it forced everyone to lean in to hear, but every syllable carried weight. "And you're going to back away from him, now?" Daniel's smirk twitched, faltering. This is none of your business," he stammered, taking half a step back, but trying to keep his shoulders squared. Elijah didn't move. He didn't need to. The air around him carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "When you put your hands on someone in front of a child, it becomes my business. When you do it on my street, it stays my business." From the corner of his eye, Marcus caught the faintest flicker of recognition in Daniel's face, the kind that wasn't just about seeing a cop, but about realizing this was a man you'd hoped never to cross. The neighbors had gone completely still. The recording phones were no longer just pointed at Marcus and Daniel. Half of them had shifted toward Elijah, their owners sensing something about this moment that would matter far beyond the street. Daniel swallowed hard, but tried to cover it with bravado. He started it, he muttered, jerking his chin toward Marcus. He came at me. Elijah's gaze didn't shift. Funny, I've been standing here for the last 2 minutes. Saw the whole thing. You laid hands first. You swung first. And you didn't stop. Daniel's lips parted, then shut again. His eyes darted toward the small crowd. Jaden had stepped halfway down the porch steps now, his small hands gripping the railing, his eyes fixed on Elijah. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly, but there was a flicker of something in his expression, something that looked like hope. Step back, Elijah said again, slower this time. Daniel hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at Marcus, as if hoping to find some shred of advantage. But Marcus stood tall now, his breathing under control, his hands at his sides. He didn't look like a man defeated. He looked like a man who knew the tide had just turned. Finally, Daniel took 2 steps back, his sneakers scraping against the concrete. Elijah's eyes never left him. Good. Now keep your hands where I can see them. The command was delivered so casually, it almost didn't register until Daniel realized his fists were still half-clenched. He opened his hands slowly, his fingers stiff. The murmurs from the crowd began to swell again, low but insistent. Someone whispered, "That's Captain Cole," and the words rippled outward, recognition passing from one neighbor to another. Daniel's jaw twitched. "So what, you gonna arrest me?" Elijah didn't answer right away. He stepped forward once, closing the gap until he was just behind Daniel's right shoulder. The captain's presence was suffocating, calculated to make even the most stubborn man feel suddenly small. "Depends," Elijah said finally, "on whether you're smart enough to shut your mouth and walk away, or whether you want to see just how fast a man like you can lose every ounce of comfort in his life." Daniel scoffed, but his voice cracked just enough for everyone to hear. "This is harassment." "This," Elijah said, "is mercy." A few people in the crowd exchanged looks at that, their phones still steady in their hands. Marcus shifted slightly, his gaze sweeping over the scene. "Elijah," he said quietly, but there was a familiarity in his tone that made Daniel's head snap back toward him. "You two know each other?" Daniel asked, suspicion in his voice. Elijah didn't bother to look at him. "For a long time," he said, then to Marcus, "You okay?" Marcus nodded once. "I'm fine. Jaden's fine." Daniel's eyes darted between them, his brow furrowed. "What is this? Some setup?" The question fell flat because in that moment it was clear to everyone that the only person setting himself up for a fall was Daniel. Elijah finally turned to face him fully. "You've got 2 choices, Daniel. One, you apologize to Marcus and his son, in front of everyone here. 2, I walk you down to my cruiser, and you explain to the station why you thought assaulting your neighbor was a good idea." Daniel's cheeks flushed, his gaze skittering toward the crowd again. Pride and fear fought in his expression. "I'm not apologizing to him," he muttered. "You're not apologizing to him?" Elijah repeated softly, as though tasting the words. "I didn't do anything wrong," Daniel said, but even he didn't sound convinced. Elijah took another step forward, and Daniel instinctively stepped back until his heel caught the curb, and he had to glance down to steady himself. "You think this is just about you two?" Elijah said. "No, this is about everyone watching. About the kids who see you treat him like less than a man because of the color of his skin. About the message you send when you think nobody's going to step in. That stops today." The street was so quiet now that the faint buzz of a mosquito sounded loud in the air. Daniel shifted his weight, trying to stand taller, but his voice had lost its earlier edge. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" Elijah asked, tilting his head slightly. "Because I think you've been waiting for someone to call you out. And I'm not just calling you out, Daniel, I'm telling you that this ends here. If you can't live next to Marcus without acting like this, then maybe you don't belong here." The words hit like a blow, and Daniel's mouth opened in protest. But before he could speak, Elijah leaned in just enough for only Daniel to hear. And if you ever touch him again, I won't be talking to you next time. I'll be cuffing you." Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, defiance, yes, but also a hint of something else, fear. Elijah straightened again, his voice returning to the level that carried across the street. "Apologize, or walk to the cruiser." For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. The air felt thick, the crowd holding still, as if they were part of a single unblinking witness. Finally, Daniel's gaze dropped to the pavement. "Fine," he muttered. "Louder," Elijah said. Daniel's jaw flexed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice louder now, but flat. Elijah didn't move. "Try again, this time like you mean it." Daniel's eyes flicked up at Marcus, the look in them sharp but unwilling. "I'm sorry, Marcus." Marcus stood still, his face unreadable. But his son Jaden stepped down the last 2 porch steps and stood beside him, the boy's chin high, his eyes fixed on Daniel. "Say it to him, too," Elijah said, nodding toward Jaden. Daniel hesitated, his lips pressing together, but then he forced the words out. "I'm sorry, kid." Jaden didn't answer. He just looked at Elijah, then at his father. Elijah took a step back, giving Daniel room to retreat. "Go inside," he said. Daniel moved toward his front door, his steps stiff, his back tight. He didn't look at anyone as he went inside, the screen door slamming shut behind him. The street exhaled. The tension didn't vanish, it lingered, heavy and unspoken, but the immediate danger had passed. Elijah turned to Marcus. "We'll talk later," he said, his tone softening slightly. Marcus nodded. "Yeah, we will." As Elijah turned toward his unmarked car at the corner, the crowd began to drift back to their porches and driveways. Phones lowered. Conversations murmured. Jaden tugged at Marcus's hand. "Dad, who is he?" Marcus's gaze followed Elijah's retreating figure. "Someone who doesn't let people get away with things like that." But deep in his chest, Marcus knew there was more to it, because Elijah hadn't just shown up. He'd known something was about to happen. And Marcus had the feeling that Daniel Harker wasn't done. Inside the neighbor's house, behind the closed blinds, Daniel stood in the darkened living room, his breathing still fast, his fists clenching and unclenching. The humiliation burned hot in his veins, and as he stared out the window toward Marcus's house, a plan was already taking shape, one that would make today look like nothing. The night settled heavy over Willow Creek Lane, wrapping the houses in darkness, broken only by the occasional porch light. Most of the neighborhood had gone still, retreating indoors after the drama of the afternoon. But behind the blinds at House 16, Daniel Harker wasn't sleeping. He sat in the dim light of his living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table, his phone in one hand. The video of the confrontation had already made its way, online grainy footage from Mrs. Patterson's grandson's phone. In the clip, Daniel could see himself clearly, red-faced, fists raised, shouting. And then Elijah Cole stepping in, forcing him back like a child caught with his hand in the jar. The comments burned worse than the alcohol. "What a coward." Good on Captain Cole for shutting him down. This guy shouldn't be allowed near kids. Daniel's jaw tightened. The humiliation from earlier had been bad enough. This was gasoline on the fire. And worse, his old buddies from high school, guys he hadn't spoken to in years, had started texting him. Some were mocking, some egging him on. But every message fueled the same thought. This wasn't over. Across the street, Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table with Jaden, helping him finish homework. Elijah's words from earlier still echoed in Marcus's mind. "We'll talk later." He didn't know exactly what the captain had meant, but the tone had been serious, protective even. "Dad?" Jaden asked, his voice pulling Marcus from his thoughts. "Yeah, Bud? Why didn't you hit him back?" Marcus looked at his son, the boy's brown eyes wide with both confusion and a hint of admiration. Because sometimes winning isn't about throwing the hardest punch. It's about making sure the person who's wrong gets shown for who they are. "You saw that today." Jaden nodded slowly, though Marcus could tell he wasn't completely satisfied with the answer. Still, the boy smiled faintly before turning back to his math sheet. By midnight, the street was quiet enough that Marcus could hear the faint hum of insects outside. He stood at the sink, rinsing his mug, when he caught movement through the window, a shadow crossing the edge of his driveway. Marcus set the mug down, his eyes narrowing. A figure was moving between the cars parked along the curb, too tall to be a kid. The shape paused near his mailbox, then bent down. Marcus stepped quietly to the front door, careful not to wake Jaden. He eased it open just enough to peek out. The street light caught a pale face, a baseball cap pulled low. Even in the dim light, Marcus recognized the rigid posture. Daniel. He was stuffing something into the mailbox. Marcus stepped out onto the porch. Daniel. His voice was sharp, cutting through the stillness. The figure jerked upright, turning toward him. For a second, Daniel froze, the whites of his eyes catching the light. Then he bolted toward his own driveway. Marcus was down the steps in 3 strides, but by the time he reached the curb, Daniel had already slipped inside his front door, the lock clicking behind him. Marcus walked back to the mailbox, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He opened it under the porch light. The words, scrawled in blocky handwriting, made his stomach knot. "You don't belong here. Next time it won't be a fist." The message wasn't a surprise, but the fact that Daniel was brazen enough to deliver it himself after the humiliation of earlier meant something dangerous. Marcus glanced up and saw movement again, but this time it was from the other end of the street. Elijah's unmarked black SUV was idling near the corner. The driver's window rolled down. "You all right?" Elijah's voice carried just enough for Marcus to hear. Marcus held up the note. Elijah's eyes narrowed. "Stay inside. Lock your doors. I'll be back." The SUV pulled away slowly, disappearing around the bend. Inside, Marcus shut and bolted the door, his mind already calculating what the next few days could bring. The next morning, the air was thick with humidity. Marcus kept Jaden home from his usual Saturday basketball practice. The note still sat on the kitchen counter, a silent reminder of the night before. By late afternoon, Marcus heard the low rumble of an engine outside. Elijah's SUV pulled into his driveway. The captain stepped out, still in plain clothes, his badge clipped to his belt. "We need to talk," Elijah said without preamble. They sat on the porch, Elijah leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. "Daniel's on thin ice? That stunt with the note?" "It's intimidation. I can have him arrested for that alone." "Then why haven't you?" Marcus asked. Elijah's eyes were steady. "Because I think he's aiming for something bigger. And if I move too soon, he slips out with nothing but a warning. I want him caught in a way that sticks." Marcus understood the logic, but his jaw tightened. "That means waiting for him to try something worse." "It means being ready when he does," Elijah corrected. From across the street, the front door of House 16 creaked open. Daniel stepped out, dressed in a white T-shirt and jeans, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He leaned against his porch railing, watching them openly. "Speak of the devil," Elijah muttered. Daniel called out, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Hey, Marcus, having the cops babysit you now?" Marcus ignored him, but Elijah turned his head slowly toward Daniel. "You're playing with fire." Daniel chuckled. "Nah, just enjoying the view." For a moment, the 2 men locked eyes across the street. Then Daniel tapped 2 fingers to his temple in a mock salute and went back inside. Elijah stood. "He's testing limits. Next time he'll push harder." Marcus looked toward the street. "And you'll be here?" Elijah's voice was firm. "Count on it." That night, Marcus sat in the living room reading while Jaden played a video game upstairs. The hum of cicadas filled the air outside. Then, faintly, Marcus heard something, a soft crunch of gravel near the side of the house. He set the book down and moved quietly to the window. At first, he saw nothing. Then a shadow slid along the fence line, low and quick. Whoever it was, they were on his property now. Marcus moved toward the door, but before he could open it, the sound of glass shattering exploded from the side of the house. Jaden's startled voice called from upstairs, "Dad?" Marcus sprinted to the kitchen. A brick lay on the floor amid shards of glass from the side window. His pulse hammered as he looked through the broken pane, just in time to see Daniel running toward the street. Marcus was halfway out the door when headlights cut across the yard. Elijah's UV screeched to a stop in front of Daniel, blocking his path. The captain was out in a flash, closing the distance with controlled strides. Daniel froze, his chest heaving. "This isn't," he started, but Elijah grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back. "You're done," Elijah said flatly. Marcus stepped forward, glass still crunching under his shoes. The crowd had already begun to gather again, drawn by the sound of breaking glass and screeching tires. Elijah glanced at Marcus. "We've got him." But Daniel's lips curved into a grin, and the look in his eyes wasn't defeat, it was defiance. "You think this is over? You have no idea what's coming." Elijah's grip tightened. "We'll see about that." Daniel laughed, a low, unsettling sound even as Elijah shoved him toward the SUV. The neighbors whispered among themselves, phones recording. And as Marcus stood in the broken light of his kitchen window, he couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's words weren't just bluster, that something worse was waiting just beyond the edge of this moment. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street in violent strokes as two marked patrol cars arrived, summoned by Elijah's call. Daniel stood with his wrists cuffed behind him, the smirk on his face never quite fading. Even as the uniformed officers guided him toward the back of a cruiser, his eyes sought out Marcus, locking on to him with the kind of stare that promised more than words ever could. "You're making a mistake," Daniel said, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "All of you." Elijah didn't respond. He handed Daniel off to the uniforms and gave them quick, precise instructions before turning back to Marcus. "We'll take him in. The brick, the note he's facing charges now. He won't be coming back here for a while." But Marcus wasn't convinced. "You saw his face, Elijah. He's not scared. He's planning something." The captain nodded grimly. "I saw it. That's why I'm not letting my guard down." From across the street, Mrs. Patterson shuffled down her porch steps, her nightgown swaying in the humid breeze. "I saw him with someone last night," she called out. "A man in a black truck. They were talking in the driveway. Didn't look friendly." Elijah's eyes sharpened. "Did you get a plate number?" She shook her head. Too dark. The information was enough to deepen the unease in Marcus's gut. Daniel wasn't just acting alone, he was reaching out. Hours later, the street had gone quiet again, the patrol cars gone. Marcus was in the kitchen, sweeping up glass when Elijah stepped back inside, his expression unreadable. "They're processing him now," Elijah said, "but his lawyer's already making calls. There's a chance he could be out on bail by tomorrow morning." Marcus paused, broom in hand. "Tomorrow?" Elijah's voice was steady. "I'll be here." They locked eyes for a long moment before Elijah left, the sound of his SUV fading down the road. Marcus spent the next hour boarding up the broken window, the rhythmic hammering of nails echoing in the silence. Jaden had long since fallen asleep upstairs, unaware of the details but sensing enough to ask, before bed, "Will we be safe?" Marcus had given him the only honest answer he could. "I'll make sure of it." By morning, news of the arrest had spread beyond the neighborhood. A local blog had posted an article with grainy screenshots from the confrontation, labeling it "Suburban Street Dispute Turns Violent." Comments flooded in, half condemning Daniel, half defending him. Marcus didn't have time to dwell on the online noise. Just after 9 Ameke called. "He's out," Elijah said without preamble. "Bail posted." Marcus felt the words settle like a weight in his chest. "That fast? Too fast," Elijah said. "And he's not going home alone. 2 men picked him up, same black truck Mrs. Patterson saw." Marcus moved to the front window, peeking between the blinds. Daniel's driveway was empty, but the sight didn't comfort him. If Daniel had muscle now, this wasn't going to be just another shouting match. "Keep your son close," Elijah said. "And if anything happens, call me first before 911. That was enough to confirm Marcus's fears. Whatever was coming, Elijah expected it to escalate before the police could even arrive. The afternoon dragged on in a haze of unease. Marcus kept busy fixing the porch railing, trimming the hedges, but every sound drew his eyes to the street. By evening, the tension had tightened into a knot in his chest. It was just after sunset when it began. A low rumble of an engine came from the end of the street. Headlights flared, cutting across the houses before the vehicle stopped in front of Marcus's driveway. The black pickup. Daniel stepped out first, dressed in a dark hoodie despite the heat. Two other men climbed out behind him, both broad-shouldered, their faces partially shadowed by baseball caps. One held something long and metallic in his right hand. Marcus stepped onto the porch. "You're trespassing," he said, his voice steady but loud enough to carry to the neighbors, who might be watching from their windows. Daniel took a slow step forward, the smirk returning to his face. "Just came to talk." "Talk from the sidewalk," Marcus said. Daniel's eyes glittered in the porch light. "You embarrassed me, Marcus. You and your little hero friend. That's not how things work for me." The man on Daniel's left shifted the metal object. It caught the light. A tire iron. Marcus's pulse kicked up, but he didn't move. "You should leave, now." Daniel took another step, his tone dropping lower. "Or what? You'll call Cole? I'm not afraid of him. Not anymore." A shadow moved at the far end of the street. Elijah's SUV, lights off, rolling slow. Marcus saw it, but Daniel didn't. "You came to my house, broke my window, left threats in my mailbox," Marcus said, each word deliberate. "You're already deep in a hole, Daniel. Keep digging, and you won't crawl out." Daniel's smirk twitched. "You think I'm the one digging?" The man with the tire iron took a step toward the porch, but froze when a voice rang out from the darkness behind them. "Drop it." Daniel spun halfway around as Elijah stepped into the wash of the porch light, his hand resting casually on his holster. The captain's presence was like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples of tension spread instantly through the scene. "You've got 10 seconds to get back in that truck and leave," Elijah said. Daniel glanced between Elijah and Marcus, calculation flickering in his eyes. His friends shifted uneasily, the one with the tire iron lowering it slightly. "This isn't over," Daniel said, but the edge in his voice had dulled. "It's over for tonight," Elijah replied. For a moment it looked like Daniel might push back, but then he jerked his chin toward the truck, and the three of them climbed inside. The engine roared and the vehicle sped off into the night. Elijah watched until the taillights vanished. Then he turned to Marcus. "They'll be back," Marcus exhaled slowly. "I know." Elijah's gaze hardened. "Next time it won't be about intimidation. It'll be about damage." From across the street, a curtain shifted Mrs. Patterson, still watching. Somewhere deeper in the neighborhood, a dog barked once and went quiet. Marcus looked Elijah in the eye. "Then we'd better be ready," Elijah nodded. "We will be." But even as he said it, the unspoken truth hung heavy between them. Readiness might not be enough. Because Daniel wasn't just angry. He was building toward something. And when it came, the whole street would feel it. The days that followed felt like walking through a storm that refused to break. Marcus moved carefully through his routines, eyes always flicking to the street, senses sharpened by the knowledge that Daniel and his men weren't done. Jaden asked less and less about the conflict now, retreating into the safety of video games and quiet nights. But Marcus saw the worry lurking beneath his son's calm. Every shadow, every unexpected sound, stirred unease. One evening Elijah stopped by again, his presence a steady anchor in the turbulent sea. They sat on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. "The truck's been parked just around the corner," Elijah said, his voice low. "I've got eyes on it day and night. But it's not just Daniel anymore. His crew is growing people who don't care what happens, only that he gets what he wants." Marcus nodded. "It's like a powder keg." Elijah's gaze hardened. "And powder kegs don't wait for permission to explode." As the night deepened, a siren wailed in the distance, faint but ominous. A few blocks away, Daniel convened with his new allies in a dimly lit warehouse. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the low murmur of conversation. "This guy Cole," one of the men said, lighting a cigarette, "he's tougher than we thought." Daniel's jaw clenched. "He's the problem. That's why we have to make sure he doesn't get in the way." Another nodded. "We hit Marcus first. Show him what happens when you cross us." Daniel stared into the shadows. Tonight. Back at Marcus's home, the air was heavy with a silence that felt unnatural. Jaden was asleep, the house quiet save for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of settling wood. Marcus stepped onto the porch for a moment, staring into the dark street. Suddenly headlights flashed down the road, cutting a bright beam toward the house. 3 figures stepped out of the black truck that had haunted the neighborhood for weeks. Daniel led them, his face set in a grim expression. Marcus's heart hammered. "They came," he muttered. Elijah appeared behind Marcus, calm but alert. "We've been waiting," Elijah said. The men approached the porch with slow, deliberate steps. Daniel's voice broke the silence, cold and hard. "This ends tonight, Marcus." Marcus met him squarely, standing tall. "No," Marcus replied. "It ends when you leave." A tense silence fell. Suddenly, the man carrying the tire iron raised it. Elijah's hand shot to his holster, his voice sharp. "Put it down." For a moment, the man hesitated, then lowered the weapon. The air thickened. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Jaden stood at the threshold, eyes wide but fearless. "Leave my dad alone," he yelled. The attackers froze. Marcus's chest swelled with pride. "Go inside, son," Marcus said firmly. Jaden hesitated, then disappeared. Elijah stepped forward, his presence commanding. "We don't want this to get worse," he said. Daniel snarled. "We're not scared of you." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "You should be." The standoff stretched for tense seconds, then Daniel snarled and turned. His crew followed, their steps heavy as they climbed into the truck. The engine roared and the vehicle sped into the night. Elijah watched until the taillights vanished. "Next time," he said, voice low, "they won't just be here to threaten." Marcus exhaled slowly. "We'll be ready." But the weight of what was coming settled deep inside him. The quiet that settled over Willow Creek Lane was a deceptive calm, a fragile mask stretched thin over a brewing storm. Marcus moved through his days with measured steps, acutely aware that Daniel's shadow lingered like a poison on the neighborhood. Every glance out the window was cautious, every knock on the door a jolt to his nerves. Jaden, once lively and carefree, had grown quieter, retreating into the solace of his books and the safety of his room. Marcus wondered how long they could hold on before the pressure broke through their walls. Elijah was a constant presence now, a vigilant guardian whose experience lent strength to Marcus's resolve. They met often strategizing, planning, reinforcing boundaries. The captain's dark eyes always held that steady fire, a promise that whatever came he would not let them stand alone. "You know they're watching," Elijah said one evening as they sat on Marcus's porch, the air thick with the scent of summer blooms and distant rain. "I do," Marcus replied, voice low. "But we won't back down. Not now," Elijah nodded. "Good, but backing down isn't the same as being unprepared." Days passed. The tension mounted like a coiled spring. Then, one night, the silence shattered. The sound came first a shattering crash from the back of Marcus's house. Marcus jolted awake, heart pounding. He raced from his bedroom to the kitchen, then to the back door. Through the broken glass of the kitchen window, he could see movement, shadowy figures slipping away under the veil of darkness. "Daniel," Marcus muttered, rage boiling beneath his skin. The damage was clear. Garden tools overturned, a door handle broken, mud tracks marking the ground. Jaden's door creaked open behind him. The boy appeared wide-eyed. "Dad?" he whispered. Marcus knelt, pulling Jaden close. "It's okay, son. I've got you." Elijah arrived minutes later, lights off to avoid drawing attention. They moved through the broken perimeter with careful eyes. "This is escalation," Elijah said, voice grim. "They're testing how far you'll let them go." Marcus clenched his fists. "We're not giving them an inch." The neighborhood woke to the news, the local police now involved officially. Marcus and Elijah met with officers, filing reports, sharing evidence, and warning of potential danger. Daniel's bail conditions tightened, but the man was still free, emboldened by his allies and the gaps in the law. That afternoon, Elijah pulled Marcus aside. "There's more than just Daniel," he said. "We're dealing with a network. People who don't care about right or wrong, only control." Marcus swallowed hard. "What do we do?" Elijah's voice was steady, resolute. "We prepare, we protect. And when they make their move, we're ready to push back." Night fell again, heavier this time. Marcus sat on his porch, watching the street, every sense alert. Then headlights flared again, cutting a path toward the house. This time a larger group emerged from the vehicle. Daniel led them, face set like stone. Their intentions were clear. Elijah appeared, steady and commanding. "You're done here," he said. Daniel sneered. "We'll see." The tension exploded. Daniel lunged forward, fists swinging. Marcus dodged, countering with force. The fight was brutal and raw, fueled by years of hate and fear. Neighbors watched, phones recording every moment. Jaden stood safely inside, watching his father defend not just himself but their home. Elijah moved to contain the chaos, calling for backup. Sirens wailed as police arrived, breaking up the fight. Daniel and his crew were arrested on the spot. The neighborhood exhaled a collective breath. Marcus stood, battered but unbroken. Elijah placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "We've won this round," he said. Marcus nodded, eyes hard but hopeful. "We keep fighting." The courtroom was packed, the low murmur of voices buzzing through the gallery like a gathering storm. Marcus sat quietly, his posture straight, eyes steady as the prosecution laid out the evidence against Daniel Harker and his associates. Every photograph of bruises, every recording of threats, every testimony weighed heavily in the air, drawing the line between justice and hatred. Elijah stood nearby, his presence unwavering, a shield in the public arena as he had been on the street. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. Knowing this was more than a trial of one man, it was a reckoning for the entire neighborhood. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, his face pale but defiant. He locked eyes with Marcus now and then, a cold fire burning behind them. The judge's voice broke through the tension, calling for order. "This court will come to order." Witness after witness recounted the litany of intimidation and violence. Neighbors who had been silenced by fear now found their voices. Standing together, the community's collective courage filled the courtroom, a powerful force against the hate that had threatened to divide them. Outside, protesters gathered, signs raised high, demanding justice. The story had spread beyond the neighborhood, a symbol of resilience against racism and violence. As the trial progressed, Marcus's thoughts drifted to Jaden. The boy sat beside his mother in the gallery, clutching his father's hand tightly. The ordeal had aged him beyond his years, but the spark of hope in his eyes reminded Marcus why they fought. One afternoon, as the defense tried to paint Daniel as a victim of circumstance, Elijah stepped forward for cross-examination. His questions were precise, cutting through the lies and manipulation, laying bare the truth with unyielding clarity. Daniel's facade cracked under pressure. The smirk faded, replaced by stammered denials and empty excuses. The courtroom watched as the man who had once wielded violence and hatred was dismantled piece by piece. Outside the courthouse, media cameras flashed and reporters whispered, capturing the unfolding drama. The community's story was no longer just theirs. It was a beacon. As the final arguments concluded, the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Silence fell over the room like a heavy curtain. Marcus's heart pounded. When the gavel struck, it was a thunderclap. Daniel Harker was found guilty on multiple counts: assault, intimidation, hate crimes. The courtroom erupted, some in tears, others in quiet relief. Marcus squeezed Jaden's hand, whispering, "We won." But as Daniel was led away in handcuffs, his eyes locked on Marcus one last time. A cold, dark promise passed between them. Outside, Elijah caught Marcus's gaze. "This is a victory," he said, "but it's only the beginning." Marcus nodded, knowing the fight for justice didn't end with a verdict. It was a daily battle, a commitment to change, to protection, to hope. And as the sun set beyond the courthouse, the neighborhood stood united, stronger, braver, ready for whatever came next. The days after the verdict were a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, exhaustion, and a cautious hope settled over Marcus and his family. The neighborhood, once fractured by fear and hate, began to stitch itself back together in quiet, determined ways. Marcus found solace in the small victories. Jaden laughing again while shooting hoops in the driveway, neighbors sharing meals on front porches, the hum of community life slowly returning. Yet beneath the surface, Marcus remained vigilant. The fight was never truly over. Old wounds ran deep, and the shadow of Daniel Harker lingered in whispers and sideways glances. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Marcus sat on his porch with Elijah. The captain had become more than an ally. He was family. "We made it through the storm," Elijah said, eyes scanning the street. "Yeah," Marcus replied, "but I want to make sure it never comes back." Elijah nodded. "That means building bridges, changing hearts, protecting this place." Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden crackle of Marcus's phone. A message from an unknown number appeared. "You think this is the end? You haven't seen anything yet." Marcus's blood ran cold. Elijah looked over, his face tightening. "That's a threat." Marcus's fingers hovered over the screen. "We can't let fear win." "No," Elijah agreed. "But we have to be ready." Over the next weeks, the neighborhood rallied. Community meetings were held, alliances forged with local leaders and law enforcement. Marcus and Elijah worked tirelessly, turning pain into purpose. Jaden thrived in the safety they created, his smile brighter with every passing day. But then, just as hope seemed to bloom fully, a new challenge emerged. One morning, a fire broke out in the house next door to Marcus's, a suspicious blaze that engulfed the porch and threatened to spread. Marcus raced outside, neighbors gathering with hoses and buckets, working frantically to douse the flames. Elijah arrived moments later, coordinating the effort, his voice steady and commanding. The fire was contained, but the message was clear. The fight was far from over. In the aftermath, the community stood stronger, refusing to be broken. Marcus addressed a crowd gathered in the park, his voice steady and resolute. "We have faced hate. We have faced violence. But we have also faced it with courage, with unity, with love." The crowd erupted in applause, the sound echoing through the trees. As the sun set on Willow Creek Lane, Marcus looked out over the faces of his neighbors, black, white, and every shade in between. He knew the road ahead would have its trials, but for the first time, he believed in a future where his family and community could live free from fear. And in that belief there was power.